right now, member of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, Independent Senator Angus King of Maine, also U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC News, Katty Kay, and MSNBC contributor Mike King. Senator, Mike Barnicle. Senator, Mike is the king. He is the legend. He is whatever you want to describe to him. But we'll come to you, Senator King. Senator, before we talk about what's going on in Russia, I'd love for you to just reflect a little bit on Madeleine Albright. I know you knew her very well. Share a story with us about the Secretary of State.
She was an extraordinary person, and as you know, she was a great stateswoman, a national, international figure, but also a very warm person. When I first came to the Senate, she sort of adopted me, and I think it was because I had Ed Muskie's seat. And the story is that one of her first policy jobs at all as a young person was in Muskie's office as a legislative assistant. She was the first woman in that kind of job. And the funny story is that as she was leaving, they had a going away party, and Muskie, she told me this story. She said Muskie was trying to articulate her role in the history of the office, but he didn't get it exactly right. He said, "I want to thank Madeleine for bringing sex to our office."
Wow. Okay.
So anyway, she was an exceptional person, both as a
she got a kick out of that.
As a national figure, international figure, but also just as a warm and extraordinarily thoughtful person. And her experience, I should mention, of course, she was a refugee.
Yes.
And that experience informed her policy, and she knew what dictatorship looked like, and continued her warning us of that possibility right up to the time of her death. I'll be there. Mika, I'm sure, is going to be there this morning at the cathedral for her service. It's a great loss to the country.
Well, great loss to the country, and of course, we sit there. You telling that story, fascinating. There's so many ways she was a trailblazer, whether it was in Ed Muskie's office or as Secretary of State. But like major figures, women who are major figures, like Thatcher, like Lagarde, you could name so many other leaders. She wasn't a woman who was Secretary of State. She was a Secretary of State who happened to be a woman.
Exactly.
When we look back at her, we don't go, "Oh, what a wonderful American story about a woman." No, we just think, hey, that was a tough leader, and we were blessed as a nation to have her on the front lines of the fight for freedom throughout her entire life. Speaking of the fight for freedom, let's talk about, Senator, I'm curious what your reaction is. Let's talk about not only the robust weapons package that the allies just agreed to send, but also talk about this new arrangement where you have Secretary Austin leading a coalition that's going to meet once a month to assess how they can best help the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian fighters. It seems we're moving into yet another phase. And once again, I will say it, the Biden administration and NATO allies are coordinating in a way, again, that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I don't think the administration and the president have gotten enough credit for putting together one of the most amazing coalitions in recent world history and holding it together. Winston Churchill once said, the only thing harder than fighting with your allies is fighting without your allies. And it's hard to hold something like this together. 30, 35 countries have done an amazing job. The administration, Tony Blinken, has done an amazing job of bringing these various people with different interests and different backgrounds. And by the way, I think there was some talk earlier in your program about the extraordinary 180-degree change in German foreign policy as a result of this invasion, but also the leadership that I think Joe Biden and the administration has provided. That 40-person, 40-country meeting yesterday was something that I don't recall ever seeing anything quite like that, and it's one of Putin's many miscalculations to underestimate both NATO, Joe Biden, the West generally, and now cutting off oil and gas to Poland. I think is another miscalculation. John McCain used to say that Russia is nothing but a gas station with an army. And now they're not even going to be a gas station. I think they may end up really regretting that as the Europeans find ways to replace the energy that they've been getting from Russia. This is a signal to the rest of Europe: you better not depend on Russia for your energy supply.
Right. That really, at this point, if we, meaning the West, NATO countries, everybody, don't realize that we got to get off that dependence now, what's going to teach? But Katty Kay, a gas station with an army that's not doing very well, that's losing generals, losing warships, losing on many levels.
I was just thinking exactly the same as you. Not a great gas station, not a great army. No. It's looking like at the moment. And Senator, you're right, the Biden administration deserves an enormous amount of credit, and all the Europeans I speak to say there was a real sea change in the way America and the White House approached them over Ukraine. They approached them as allies, they spoke to them as allies, they shared intelligence with them as allies, and there was a real recognition in the White House that this coalition was going to work if the United States and Europe were in lockstep over things like sanctions and weapons supplies. So the coalition has held. It's in a very good position. The battle on the ground is working. The Ukrainians are taking this fight to the Russians in a way we didn't imagine. What worries you? What keeps you up? You look at intelligence all the time. You look at the armed services all the time. At this stage in the battle, 2 months in, what are the things that you're worried about?
Well, I think there are two things in there interrelated. What is Putin's next step? He's embarrassed. He must be. I wouldn't want to be in his inner circle right now. I mean, he's got to be just wild about the failure of all these miscalculations and things that are not working. So what does he do? The history is in Chechnya and Syria, he bombs. He attacks civilians. He increases the pressure on the civilians in order to try to bring pressure on the government or on whatever group he's trying to destroy. So that's one possibility, and we're already seeing that. The other, of course, we don't like to talk about is nuclear weapons. And it's important to realize that Russia has a different view of nuclear weapons than we do, or than practically anybody else in the world. They view nuclear weapons as just part of their stockpile of weapons to use in a conflict. And they actually have a doctrine, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called escalate to de-escalate. And the idea is, if we're losing on the battlefield, we'll raise the stakes by using tactical nuclear weapons and dare our opponents to respond in kind. And that will, their theory is, de-escalate the conflict. They're losing on the battlefield. Now, they've always said they would only do that if the motherland was in danger. But Putin considers Ukraine and certainly Crimea part of the motherland. So this is what makes Putin, I think, the most dangerous single individual in history. He's a dictator. He's amoral. He has this fantasy of rebuilding the Soviet Union and that he's sort of the reincarnation of Frederick the Great, and he has nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Yeah, Mike Barnicle, it's a great point the senator makes. At the same time, maybe it's time to try something different with Vladimir Putin.
Well, I don't know what difference we could concoct without risking widening the war. And as part of Vladimir Putin, who probably wants us to entice us into a larger war. But Senator King, you just pretty much described the degree and the depth of danger that we face in the Ukraine. There's a very powerful picture on the front page of the New York Times this morning of a 21-year-old Ukrainian soldier burying his twin brother. And if you can take a look at that picture, he's got his left hand softly, gently on his twin brother's forehead, his twin brother killed in battle. My question to you is, in this sometimes silly, sometimes spoiled, but always great nation of ours, getting people to concentrate on the danger posed by Putin and what is going on in Ukraine sometimes seems to be fleeting by the hour each and every day. And I'm wondering, when you go home to Maine, if you've noticed any difference in the degree that people feel about the war in Ukraine from a month ago to this past weekend?
I'd have to say no, Mike. I think people are still engaged and concerned. In fact, most of the correspondence I get is from anguished constituents who are saying, why don't we do more? Why don't we do a no-fly zone? Why don't we do more? Why don't we just go in and wipe this guy out? And that's, again, I come back to, I think, an extraordinary job by the administration of walking a very thin line between lethal aid, humanitarian aid, giving the Ukrainians the tools they need to win without stumbling into World War III. And that's a narrow line. And I think you're right. I think Putin would, at this point, probably think maybe he would like to see us move in that direction. So this is I brought with me, I'm not going to pull it out and read it, but the aid that we've supplied is extraordinary. 50 million rounds of ammunition, howitzers, javelins, Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, and the will to fight by the Ukrainians and the tools that we and the other countries in the West have given them is what's stymieing Vladimir Putin and raising the issue of the Ukrainians actually winning this war.
Yeah, well, Senator, will you do us a favor? Because I think it's so important for Americans to see this. Will you get that piece of paper out and let us see it? Because I think it's critical. So many Americans, they watch TV, they see what's happening, they go, oh, we should do more, we should do more. We've done an extraordinary amount, and we have done it in phases, and we've done it in a way that didn't start World War III. I really do believe it is one of the great diplomatic accomplishments of the past 50 years by an American president. Can you run us through that list?
Yeah, I'll just run down. 1,400 Stingers, 5,500 Javelin anti-tank missiles. And by the way, I think we've given them 10 Javelins for every Russian tank. 14,000 anti-armor systems, 700 Switchblade unmanned aerial systems, otherwise known as drones, 90 155-millimeter howitzers, 72 tactical vehicles to tow the howitzers, 16 M-17 helicopters, 200 armored personnel carriers, 7,000 small arms, as I mentioned, 50 million rounds of ammunition, 75,000 sets of body armor, unmanned aerial systems, laser-guided rocket system. The list goes on. It's a two pages, single space, and it's really amazing. And the other thing I want to mention, yesterday was a milestone. We were talking about informing the allies. Tony Blinken was at Capitol Hill yesterday. It was his 100th briefing of Congress since all this started. Wow. That's pretty amazing too. He's engaged the Congress. I mean, for a while we were having briefings practically every day from somebody in the administration.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
and what we're hearing back from Mika's brother, who's of course the ambassador of Poland. He talks about a spirit of bipartisanship that would have been unthinkable a couple of months ago when you have Republicans and Democrats going over, getting advice there. I had an administration official, senator, telling me, he said, I went over and I spoke to a group of 30 senators, Republicans and Democrats alike, and why? It was actually like talking to a group of human beings, that there was a spirit of bipartisanship. And I must say, you know, I've done a lot of reading throughout my adult life on Harry Truman and what Truman did in 46 and 47 and moving beyond to create the world that we live in right now. And I must say, as I was reading and writing a book about it, I found it hard to believe that a Truman could talk to a Vandenberg, that staffs could coordinate the way they did. I'll be damned if it's not happening really on Capitol Hill right now. And so for Americans, Senator, tell me whether you agree, but for Americans who say we need to do more, you're showing us we are doing more and we're willing to go to the next level while walking that fine line.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. And you mentioned bipartisanship. I was in Poland and Germany not long ago with a group of 10 senators, entirely bipartisan, and we met. It was interesting on all levels and powerful and disturbing when we went to a refugee center just off the Ukrainian border. But we had dinner with a group of German Bundestag members of their parliament, and of various parties, and to see their engagement and their involvement in this was really impressive. So, you know, it used to be, the old saying was, politics stops at the water's edge. That hasn't been the case in recent history, but I think in this situation it is. That's certainly the case in the U.S. Senate. I mean, if you interviewed 10 of us, you couldn't tell which party was which is obviously the way it ought to be.
Yeah, and that's happening, Senator, in Poland as well, with a very divided country coming together to embrace Ukrainians. And if you look at the headlines, even this week, what is it, Wednesday, you have really a change in rhetoric toward Ukraine here in the U.S., Lloyd Austin leading that, using the word winning. We have this incredible meeting in Germany with 40 nations getting together. And, I mean, it really, and this list that you just read to us, it seems to me that maybe we are edging toward doing things a little differently toward Russia. Maybe.
Well, you know,
we'll see.
This will go down in history as one of the great miscalculations in the last 200 or 300 years since Napoleon went to Moscow. I mean, it was, or Hitler tried to take on the Russians. That was a huge miscalculation. But everything that Putin wanted to achieve, he's done the opposite. He's united the Ukrainians. He's united the West. He's strengthened NATO. Sweden and Finland want to join NATO.
Exactly.
That's a nightmare for
And we're
Putin.
sending ambassadors back into Ukraine saying it's here to stay. Senator Angus King, thank you very much for coming on this morning. And God